The theme of the session is Western Academic Theories, Problems and Biases. It's a little technical session, and we have heavyweight specialists in this highly technical area. And I have communicated with all of them because a lot of us are not necessarily hardcore political scientists or, literary theory specialists or something. But I thought that it is extremely important that in a general sense, we should have an understanding that why do universities, it's not the problem with JNU or Oxford or Harvard, that they produce the literature which we do not like. There is something in the system and in their theories themselves that encourages them and propels them in a particular direction. So we have 4 eminent speakers and a very eminent chairperson. Professor Shri Prakash Singh ji is here. He is the chairperson of this session. The purpose of this session is for all of you and for me to understand that doesn't matter whether you're a student of Hindi or English or political science or history or even Sanskrit for that sake, if you go through the system, and it does not matter whether you go through it in Jawaharlal National University, in Kanpur Vishwavidyalaya, or in Harvard, you will end up producing the same type of literature which is being produced now. What are the reasons? That is the purpose. So without further ado, we are running a couple of minutes late. I'll invite Professor Shri Prakash Singh ji. I will introduce him. He's our chairperson for this session. He's a professor of political science in University of Delhi, Bharat. He's also holding the statutory position of the director of South Campus of University of Delhi. He's a renowned scholar on Bharatiya political thought, culture, and politics. And he's also the chairperson of prestigious Ambedkar Chair at Bharatiya Lok Prashasan Sansthan at IIPA, that is Indian Institute of Public Administration, New Delhi. He's the chairman of Center of Hindu Studies. This is a new Center of Hindu Studies which just got started in Delhi University with his and the Vice Chancellor, I think Vice Chancellor is also here, their help in Delhi University, which is the largest university in our country. And also the Center for Tribal Studies at University of Delhi. He's published over 14 books, along with many research papers and so on and so forth. So I don't want to continue. I'll give him the position and he'll conduct the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Nachiketa ji and Swami Vijnanand ji having me here in this conference. There's a Sanskrit sukta, nahi jnanen sadrishyam pavitram evam vidyate. Means nothing is most sacred than knowledge. When we look at our knowledge traditions, we find a gap. And that gap is because of Western academic theories. For example, Chicago School of Thought came with system analysis, behavioral perspective, post-behavioral perspective, structural functional perspectives, and functional structural, and finally the developmental approach. If you look at these schools of thoughts, you will find the age of 10 to 12 years. System analysis for 10 years, behavioral and post-behavioral 10 years. They have been changing their perspective, and their perspective and argument is for the developing countries. And what they did to our academic. In social sciences, we started scienticization of social sciences and its researches. And while doing so, we forget our own legacy and our contributions. Being a chair, I have hardly few minutes to spell out few things. For the reminding sake, Ashtadhyay of Patanjali talks about a Tantra Yukti. And in that Tantra Yukti, Panini talks about 28 elements. And in last chapters of Arthashastra, 15th Adhikaran, Kautilya talks about 32 elements of research. And friends, if you go to the Tantra Yukti given by Kautilya, that will give you how rich it was. And if you read those lines of research methodology, how neutrality is maintained, how academic can reach on a certain conclusion without any biases, that Kautilya tells us. Sushrut talks about 36 elements. Unfortunately, in social sciences, we have not been following our own traditions and values of the research methodology. A very good book published by Theosophical Society written by Annie Besant. Annie Besant talks about 4 elements. How to do research on ancient India or Indian perspectives or the Indian knowledge system. And one key element spelled by Annie Besant is faith in the literature, devotion in literature. And when you are researching on it, be with that literature. But look at the Western discourse. In Western discourse, we find books written by Wendy Donier, The Hindus, an Alternative History. And if you read that literature, you will find that they gave all credit to our colonial masters. And if you read Brian Pennington, he also deals in the same manner. Neeraj C. Chaudhary, Hinduism, a Religion to Live By, published by OUP, very specifically, clearly tells us, in the reading about Hinduism, the reader must emancipate himself from the prepossessions created by the current conceptions of religion. It is of European origin, but has been adopted even by modern Hindus under the influence of Western thought. Just look at the irony. Just look at the irony, what our literature has given us, what our traditions, values has given us, and what these Western scholars have been writing for us. Without wasting much of time, I invite our first speaker, Professor Anand Singh. Professor Anand Singh is a professor of anthropology at the School of Social Sciences, University of KwaZulu-Natal, Durban, South Africa. He has a special project on indigenous knowledge system and sustainable development. His current research interests are in the Bharatiya diaspora in the context of Hindutva and the transforming Bharat. Professor Anand Singh is editor of Journal of Sociology and Social Anthropology. Professor Anand Singh.
To the organizers of this conference, and especially to Professor Nachiketa Tiwari, I want to thank him and them for giving me this privilege to talk to you. I really appreciate this. As a South African, I come here to deliver a talk in 10 minutes, trying to compress 2,000 years of history into 10 minutes. I'll do my best to try to reach you within that time. But right now, to introduce myself, I grew up through the apartheid years. I'm now in the post-apartheid era. And we are fighting battles on various fronts. My own contribution towards this conference here has come through certain propagations that built up within me since childhood, and is beginning to manifest in other ways right now, to ensure that at least we either reshape our identities or in some ways submit to the forces that are trying to change us. Now, the title of this conference, World Hindu Congress, for me makes Hindu identity a core factor and theme of this event. It instigates discussions and narratives around how Hindus see and should see themselves among the diverse tapestry of people that make up this world. And very crucial to this point is that we are never going to want to change the rest of the world because you don't believe in the God that we believe in. Raising issues of relevance for a fresh approach to education. In a and I have to bring the contemporary into perspective here, for a post-war Russia-Ukraine and Israel-Palestine era, requires revisiting some of the core historical factors that shape and determines individual, community, ethnic, and national guidelines around identity issues. And I bring in the Middle East and Europe, largely because over the last 2,000 years, the world has been left almost unchallenged in their care, and what a mess they made. And what a mess they continue to make. Identity building then in this context is cognizant of its inherent condition to function as a multi-layered and situational factor in terms of human relations. While this elasticity allows people a degree of flexibility in relational terms, it remains subject to several universal norms and laws that are fundamental to peace, progress, and prosperity for all in this world. Not one single religion is capable of ever achieving this. Not a single ideology is ever capable of achieving this. But a determination to coexist is the only possibility. However, not all of the world ideologies are endowed with these universal norms. The more desperate people become about the survival of their practices, about their beliefs and ideologies, the more violent they become. And the more violent they become, the more disruptive they become to the rest of the world. And that's what we are actually witnessing right now in Ukraine and in Palestine. This brings me to the contestation between Western notions of theory and practice and Bharatiya notions of the same. Reference to Bharatiyas, to me, embraces all those within Bharat and the diaspora as well, especially those who identify with the universal values and temperament that its civilizational past has to offer to a world that is so jaded by the nexus of exploitative control and manipulation by superpower corporatism and gerrymandering. Human history over the last 3,000 years is replete with episodes of the use of brute force during invasions, territorial and people capturing, religious conversion by the sword, and the appropriation of natural resources almost always at the expense of captured populations. Rome and Romanism stands at the forefront of imperialistic expansionism, covering an area of around 5 million square kilometers, with the indirect rule by the Romans manifesting as the earliest evidence of remote control authoritarianism. Jesus Christ and the emergence of Christianity after his demise laid low for the first 300 years since its inception because of constant persecution of the Christians. It was only after Constantine in the 4th century CE, a polytheistic Roman warrior supported by Christian fighters, that is Constantine, and his fighters, who were mainly Christian, that its spread was accompanied by a militarized process of conversion and expansionism. In Gaul, town of Gaul that Constantine was once passing through, he claimed that he saw in the sky an inscription, En Tau Te Nikah. Nikah has got nothing to do with the Muslim marriage. En Tau Te Nikah meant upon this sign, conquer, leading to this being engraved on all of Constantine's army's swords and on their armor. The 11th century witnessed the rise of Knights Templars, a fighting force committed only to the defense and spread of Christianity through an ascetic way of life. But cheating on their vows was actually their nemesis. Between the 11th and 16th centuries, fighting between Christians and Islamic armies led to regular clashes and battles. The spread of Christianity was arrested by Islamic armies that were determined to control the Mediterranean and the Middle East. It is actually out of these victories that the Middle Eastern fighting forces continue to believe that European and Jewish armies can be defeated. The 16th century turned into the age of European discovery, when the seeds of European enlightenment were being sown. By the 18th century, this was consolidated and became the beacon that guided colonialism under the guise of spreading civilization and technological advancement. Very selectively, however, and racially applied. In the social sciences, theories of evolution and diffusion prevailed. They were used to justify superiority over all others by the Europeans, until it was replaced by more enlightened versions in the value of local social fabric and customary practices, which are now serving as indispensable guidelines for sustainable development projects. In the West, Enlightenment was used to demonstrate alleged, perceived European superiority over all other nations through great intellectual changes politically, socially, and economically from the 17th century. In Bharat, however, Enlightenment refers to spiritual upliftment at an individual level. If Enlightenment has to be used in the social and economic sense, then Bharat has experienced it over several periods through the advent of Buddhism, Jainism, Sikhism, and every other way. Enlightenment came long before the 18th and 19th centuries in Bharat. Individualism in the collective West is about working for personal, materialist, and economic upliftment, often in terms of winner takes all. Bill Gates and others, for instance, are classic examples of this. And we saw what they did in the last period of COVID. All from a so-called human rights perspective. In Bharat, it's about moral responsibility, turning inward, turning within, and using one's accumulated experiences to serve in the context of social responsibility. Thank you. I have exactly 1 more minute, and I'll do it. Responsibility rather than a collective communal rights, human rights perspective. Caution not to idealize and romanticize over this concept, but the RSS Pracharaks do have it in them to show that it actually does work in turning situations around. One of Bharat's greatest assets to itself, and an equally great fear among oppositional forces to this idea from throughout the world. Bharatiya's biggest challenge lies in overcoming impediments to national reconstruction through revival of civilizational values, confronting Western notions of individual upliftment, individual careerism, and individualism, popularizing educational models such as the Ramakrishna Mission's Awakened Citizen program towards a values-based approach to produce citizens with a greater sense of community responsibility rather than self-interest alone. This program started barely a few years ago, has already reached in Bharat itself more than 1 million children. The Awakened Citizen program is a 3-year graded valued education program for students in middle school. 20 seconds. Is a 3-year graded program by education for students in middle school and high school, run by the Ramakrishna Math and Ramakrishna Mission. The purpose of this program is to ignite the infinite strength and potential inherent in every child. An awakened citizen actively participates in creating a positive and inclusive society, working towards the betterment of individuals and communities. They are committed to promoting social justice, equality, and sustainable development, and inspire others to become active and engaged citizens as well. I just want to end with this one comment. When Swamiji mentioned earlier in this first session this morning that we have made a U-turn, that U-turn is actually going back to fight to re-establish our identity. But you've got to know the strengths and the weaknesses of your opposition in order to go to battle. And in order to win, you've got to know your own strengths and weaknesses. So we cannot enter this battle without understanding our history. without understanding of the opposition's history and their strengths, because it's the only way we'll be able to build up our strengths. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Anand. Our next speaker, Dr. Vikram Sampath, author and historian. Dr. Vikram Sampath, a prominent Bangalore-based historian, is known for his eight academic books on Bharatiya history, including a best-selling 2-volume biography of Bir Savarkar, endorsed by Prime Minister Honorable Narendra Modi ji. He achieved his recognition as a Fellow of Royal Historical Society of UK in 2021 and received the Sahitya Academy First Yuva Puraskar for English Literature and ARSC International Award for his historical research on Gauhar Jan in New York. With a doctorate in history and music from University of Queensland, he held significant roles such as Senior Research Fellow at Nehru Memorial Museum and Library. I welcome Dr. Vikram Sampath for the...
Very good morning, everyone. And it's a great pleasure, a privilege, an honor to be speaking at the World Hindu Congress and with such distinguished fellow panelists. I think Professor Anand Singh made my work a little easy by setting the stage for where I could take off from. Of course, I'm also feeling like the odd man in the panel because I don't have a PPT. I thought 10 minutes is all I have. Let me try to compress as much as I can in this limited time. And I stand before you to represent a discipline, a subject, history, which I think most of us have unfortunately grown up studying, hating it in school for the manner in which it was taught to all of us. Very insipid, very boring, learn by rote and just pass the exams. But then after we grow up, we realize that the importance of this discipline, which gives us almost a mirror, which gives us a sense of identity about ourselves, our civilization, and where we come from. And that is when we also realize the insidiousness of the opposing camp. And why they do that is because of what George Orwell, the famous English novelist, had said, that he who controls the past controls the future. And if you see most of the contemporary debates, all the contemporary conflicts that we have are somewhere rooted in historical themes or characters with extremely deep contestations and vigorous polarization. And somewhere, unfortunately, I'm really, sometimes feel very desperate and have despair that we as Hindus have really not woken up to the fact that we have outsourced our history writing, our historiography. We do not realize the importance of what it means to give it this away to an ideological cohort, which can be largely named as leftist historiography. It combines within it several strands, starting, of course, from where Professor Anand Singh left. In the 18th century, we had Hegel, the father of what is called the idea of the modern West, who looked at Western universalism, that was the hallowed objective of all civilizations which are progressing towards achieving what the West has. And building upon that was, of course, the Marxist theory. You have the dialectic, which constantly talks of a thesis and an antithesis, constantly in clash with each other, leading to a sense of synthesis in society. And all these theories, whether it's Hegel, whether it's Marx, whether it's Antonio Gramsci, whether it is Immanuel Kant, whether it's Nietzsche, all these philosophers and people whose theories deeply inspire Marxist historiography even in India, the critical theory, which Oppenheimer started in 1937, all these people talk about just this, the constant clash between groups, the hegemonic culture and a counter-hegemony. And so in the Indian context, the Indian Marxists were quick to adopt this to say that the Brahmins are the constant oppressors. You have to constantly look at very subtle strands of bias, of structure, which you need to deconstruct and then dismantle. So these terms are constantly used. You had the Dismantling Global Hindutva conference also. And those who are awakened to these social injustices and structures are the ones who understand the critical theory, which later became, of course, the critical race theory, but also in popular parlance are the ones who are the woke, who have awakened themselves to social injustices, and they are ready to dismantle this through activism, through academics, and through various other structures. But then, I have a lot of problem with the topic that I have been given in this conference, which is the hows and the whys of Marxist distortion. In 10 minutes to talk about a topic which has been, I think, oft repeated, is, to my view, always, I think it's very, very not too productive, because we will keep doing the Purva Paksha by when I think the opponent has gone several kilometers away. As even Winston Churchill had said, by the time the Hindus have elaborated the arguments, the Muslims have already sharpened their swords. And the opponent here can be not just the Muslim, but also the Marxist and everyone else who have their theories. We will still keep talking about what are the distortions, never talking of the Uttara Paksha as to what is the counter, what is the alternative that we can do as Hindus, as the only surviving pre-Bronze Age civilization. But since the conference has given me this topic, I'd like to quickly run through some key points of what I think are the chief distortions in Indian history as done by the Marxists. One is, of course, as a takeaway of this thesis, antithesis, hegemony, counter-hegemony that I spoke about, is this sense of perennial apologia about your past. You're reading about your past. If you look at the textbooks that some of the students in India are reading, it's almost as if you're reading about some other country. It's not your own country. You're reading about it in third person. You have to constantly feel repentant about the mistakes of the past. Now, every society goes through highs and lows, pluses and negatives. And the work of a historian is not to stir up, mass jingoism and hysteria. But the counter is also not true, that you constantly feel apologetic about what you have. You denigrate and downplay your own achievements and almost, don't even acknowledge your Hindu identity. The other thing that comes very close to this is a spectacular disconnect from your roots, which I think is unparalleled in the world. Negation of Bharat's civilizational greatness is almost like a fashion statement, so to say. And India is always seen through the eyes of her invaders. If you see the way our history textbooks too are written, it's a long litany list of battles that we as Bharatiyas have lost, right from the invasions of the Greeks, the Scythians, the Huns, the Shakas, to the Arabs, the Turks, the Timurids, the Portuguese, the Dutch, the French, the British. They all just kept coming, and we were covering our feet in front of them and succumbed to invasions. Now, if we are the only, as I said, pre-Bronze Age era civilization which is still alive, there must have been some courage and resistance that our poor ancestors also put through. There must have been some wars that we also won. Now, why is it that these wars, these heroes, and more importantly also heroines, a lot of women in our long historical discourse, they do not feature in what is the popular Bharatiya historiography in India? The history of the country is so rooted and centered around the city of Delhi. I don't have anything against it. It's a wonderful city, and I sometimes wonder if I go there, I'll never be allowed to enter, considering the amount of bad-mouthing I do for it being the whole center of our history. But then every small little, insignificant dynasty that has ruled Delhi, even bigoted and tyrannical ones, the Lodhis and Khiljis and Tughlaqs and all these people who have absolutely no contribution to our civilizational heritage. We are forced to learn by rote the succession plans of all these kings. But then vast swathes of the country, the south of India, the northeast of India, the Rajputs, the Marathas, the Shatavahanas, the Rashtrakutas, the Cholas, the Pallavas, the Ahoms, all these do not even feature in the larger historiography of Bharat as we know it. So I think Bharat needs to snatch back her history from Delhi centricity. Now, closely linked with the disconnect from our roots is almost a denial of an erasure of all the traditional Indian knowledge systems in every field, be it philosophy, language, mathematics, sciences, metallurgy, chemistry, Ayurveda, yoga, all these different fields. Again, the sense that we are no-gooders. We are a nation of losers. We have only been, oppressing each other. We have been losing in front of people who have invaded us. That has been the dominant narrative. And along with that is the denial of the very idea of India or Bharat. There is a difference between a nation and a nation state. A nation state, of course, has codified laws, it has boundaries, but a nation predates that through civilizational oneness. And in that, for centuries, I think there has been a commonality of Bharat as a civilizational entity, as a nation. I'm told I have 1 minute, so in that I will try to hurry up as much as possible from medieval India through, modern India in 60 seconds. Very quickly, all the darker elements of our history have been denied. The denial of genocides, and I don't need to elaborate that to the crowd here who know how, crores and crores of people have been massacred. Hindus have been massacred. Sometime between 1,000 to 1,500 CE, as per historian K.S. Lal, the population of the subcontinent fell by 8 crores. And this, they just didn't drop down dead. It was an organized genocide which was based on theological reasons. The estimates of temples that were destroyed, anywhere from 4,000, as Sitaram Goyalji says, to 40,000 at the least is a conservative estimate, are places of learning, be it Nalanda, Vikramshila, Takshashila, all of this being destroyed, sex slavery of women who were sent away to the Middle East. All of this is not spoken about in the larger rubric of that Ganga Jamuni Tehzeeb animal that doesn't exist, but which is constantly invoked with the idea that, talking about these uncomfortable elements of our past somehow upsets the contemporary social unity in Bharat. But dare I say, and as I've said this time and again, the edifice of national unity cannot rest on the shaky foundations of whitewashed history. It is going to collapse each and every time there is a whiff of truth that blows through, and that is the schisms and the problems that we are seeing in our country. George Santayana had said, those who do not remember the past are condemned to repeat it. And I think in the Bharatiya context, we have not grappled and understood these issues related to the manner in which our history is depicted. And so these controversies, these problems continue to exist. I hope at least in the question answer and the discussion that follows, we go beyond the Purva Paksha. We look at the Uttara Paksha, we look at solutions, we look at strategies as to not continuously keep demonizing Western concepts, Marxist theories. They have done what they have done. That was their dharma. They have stayed very true to their dharma. Now let us do our dharma. Let us see how we can actually proactively work to correct the narrative. Thank you.
Kautilya's methodology. When Vikram Sampath was referring about Purva Paksha and Uttar Paksha, that one is spelled by Kautilya in Tantra Yukti in chapter 15's Adhikaran of Arthasastra. Right? If you will read that, you will find fantastic one. Now we have another speaker, Dr. Koenraad Elst. Dr. Koenraad Elst studied at the KU, Lebanon, obtaining a degree in Sinology, Indology, and Philosophy. After research stay at Banaras Hindu University, he did original field work for the doctorate on Hindu nationalism, which he obtained magna cum laude in 1998. As an independent researcher, he earned laurels and ostracism with his findings on hot items like Islam, multiculturalism, and secular state, the root of Indo-European, the Ayodhya temple, mosque dispute, and Mahatma Gandhi's legacy. He also published on interface of religion and politics, the reinvention of Hindu Dharma, and technical points of Hindu and Chinese philosophy. Today he will be speaking on Marx and his legacy. Koenraad Elst, please.
Okay. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, I thank the organizers and especially Professor Nachiketa Tiwari for putting all this together and for inviting me. So here we go. The influence of Marxism in India. We start with Karl Marx. He was a typical bourgeois intellectual who never much worked in his life, who fathered an illegitimate son upon his housemaid, and all the typical stuff. He was quite meritorious as a journalist, as a spreader of ideas. Indeed, there is no common measure between the little writing he did and the geopolitical influence he has had, and to some extent still has. He was much less meritorious as an economist. His book Das Kapital, which is unreadable, and which me too, I have only browsed a little, that has had an enormous influence. But the really most read work of Karl Marx, written in Brussels, is the Communist Manifesto. That the working class has nothing to lose but its chains. And, he was very good at coining memorable phrases. And so the main lesson of that work is that the history of every society is the history of class struggle. And so he introduces a conflict model of sociology, which is countered soon after by the Catholic Church in their doctrine of social harmony, which is quite parallel to what will develop in India as a counter to communism. In the 1960s, you had the launching of integral humanism by Deen Dayal Upadhyay, which incidentally is the same term launched already in the 1930s in France in perfectly similar circumstances. You see, there too, communism was a rising force. It was godless. That was the set phrase at the time, godless communism. And so religious people tried to find an answer to that, recognizing that some social change was necessary and inevitable, but rejecting the conflict model. And so in my very short time, that's the main theme I'd like to emphasize, the role of the idea of a conflict model. Both capitalism and its specific form of colonialism has a double role in Marxism. It is rejected in the sense that we should have socialism and equality. Nevertheless, it's also praised, and it has a useful role in history because it comes to destroy the earlier phase of feudalism, or in some societies, the earlier phase is slavery, which in Europe was an even earlier phase in the Greco-Roman period. And so it comes to break up all kinds of traditional social structures like the aristocracy, like the family as an economic unit. In the old system, a father used to learn a son used to learn his trade from his father and so on, taking over the family business. All that starts cracking up. And colonization is the way of, progressive societies to export this breakdown of feudalism to quote-unquote backward societies like India. And so Marxism really is only anti-capitalism and anti-colonialism once the alternative of socialism starts dawning. But so before that, it has a necessary and constructive role in history. In 1917, you get the famous Russian coup d'etat known as revolution, which is a very flattering term. You see here the Great Four with the fourth one. The one on the right is Trotsky, Leon Trotsky, who actually led the Red Army to victory. Then soon after, he gets, sidelined by Stalin, who is the right-hand man in the picture below. Stalin says famously that to be a true communist, you have to put loyalty to the Soviet Union first. And so, totally ignoring the economic dimension of Marxism, you see this for the Hindu movement in India becomes the main reason to oppose communism. But so economically, they're not very serious about opposing it. When socialism comes into vogue in the 60s, we see in the Jansang also a shift towards socialism. As Ram Swarup said at the time, you see, in India, there is a multiplicity of parties, but a unity of slogans. Like, for instance, nowadays, development, every party is for development. It's hard to find a party that is for Hinduism. It also supports atheism worldwide. And so in India, that, among other things, means support to secularism. Communism enters India formally with the creation of the Communist Party of India, which didn't happen in India, but in Tashkent, in Uzbekistan, by M.N. Roy. It was an interesting character. And in fact, you see, many nationalists will like him if you see the facts of his life. In the First World War, he tried to involve German support for the revolution against the British in India. He has a very lasting influence, like he's the one who introduces the idea that Islam came to India for social equality, and that the masses in India were yearning for Islam and very gladly converted to Islam. So you see all the Muslims you see around you, they are the descendants of the progressive part of the masses who seized the opportunity of Islam, whereas you people, you know, you are backward and so on. At the end of his life, M.N. Roy himself quit communism and chose something he called radical humanism. But so his influence is enormous. Okay. Yeah, these are the great five. I'm told that in West Bengal there is a temple where they worship this picture here of Mao Zedong and all the others. As Jyoti Basu said, you see, China's chairman is also India's chairman. The economic policy of communism becomes very influential in India. Jawaharlal Nehru was a follower of the Fabian socialism, which he learned in Cambridge, with a strong tinge of the Soviet model. Like you have 5-year plans, you have central planning, which kept India in proverbial poverty. And it's only in 1991 that Narasimha Rao, the best prime minister India ever had, introduced some form of liberalization, which unshackled the energies of the Indian people, which were on full display in the diaspora, and which then started doing to India what we can now see all around us. Let's limit myself to the important things. About the Frankfurter Schule, you will learn in a moment from Professor Babones. But so that was a reaction after the First World War to the failure of Karl Marx's predictions. You see, he had expected that the working class would reject fighting one another in the First World War, whereas in every country they voted for the war budget. And so, you know, nationalism appeared to be stronger than class solidarity. And so how come? So one answer is the Frankfurter Schule, another is Gramsci, Antonio Gramsci, who was the leader of the Italian Communist Party. So he said we have to first conquer the cultural sphere and then the economic revolution will follow. There was a resistance in India under the Society for the Defense of Freedom in Asia with Sitaram Goel. in 1962, the Chinese invaded, and as Goel's analysis is, because it's still a mystery, why did the Chinese stop, not conquer more of India? So he says the whole thing was a pinprick of China against a Soviet ally, which India was at the time, to send a message to the Russians. And so they were not really attacking India, although, of course, the gain in territory was welcome. Their main importance in India is the control of the cultural and educational sphere, which happened mostly around 1970 when Indira Gandhi needed allies, and so she bartered with the communists, giving them that control. So it's mostly soft power that they have, and even though they lost the elections the last few times, that soft power is still continuing. In the educational sphere especially, that goes on. So the thing to do is some kind of civilizational force that gradually phases out this Marxist influence. Thank you.
Thank you, Koenraad. Dr. Babones is a quantitative comparative sociologist whose current research focuses on the political sociology of democracy. In the past, he has also published on economic development in post-socialist transitions economies and quantitative methods for cross-national comparisons. He writes extensively on public policy issues and is widely cited commentator on Australian higher education. His short book, The New Authoritarianism, Trump Populism and the Tyranny of Experts, was named among the best on politics 2018 by the Wall Street Journal. I welcome you, Professor Babones, for the talk.
All right, well, I'm Salvatore. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I was asked to speak today to give a short primer on critical theory. I should stress this is not my research. This is a teaching lecture on critical theory, and I'm very happy to have the opportunity to teach about it. Critical theory is a set of broadly humanistic approaches to the social sciences, meaning they're not based on empirical research, they're based on theoretical understandings of the world. And the basic idea is that, this is not, I'm sorry, I just assumed I would be able to lecture from my slides. So the idea is that people are embedded in larger social structures that shape the way they think. For example, if you grow up in a patriarchal family, you might have an affinity for patriarchy or being willing to accept larger patriarchal institutions in society. Critical theorists would assert that it might even prime you for authoritarianism and receptiveness towards authoritarianism. Can we go to the next slide? Critical theory is largely associated with the Frankfurt School. The Frankfurt School arose in Germany in response, as Dr. Elst said, to World War I and the failure of global socialism, or the failure of a socialist revolution to emerge globally. And the question was, why are people not embracing the socialist revolution that critical theorists thought was in their interest? And their answer was that they had been psychologically programmed by their positions in larger social structures to have a set of attitudes that accepted those social structures. Some of the theorists associated, well, I'll just say they're on the board. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay. Some of the best empirical research on critical theory is found in the United States, and some of this is actually of very high quality. So, for example, American sociologists have shown pretty persuasively that young Americans, as young as age 3 or 4, are already aware of of racial hierarchies in the United States, which is to say that a 3-year-old already knows that white ranks higher than black, is already aware that black is a term of derision. They're already aware of derisive terms for people of different minorities, which is to say that 3-year-olds from the family environment have already picked up the larger cultural hierarchies and the larger racial hierarchies in American society. They're also aware of who is what race. So they're very aware, I'm white, you're black, you're Asian, in the American context, which is not necessarily an essential racial quality, it's how Americans define race. Children pick this up at a very young age. Can we go to the next slide? Okay. Crucially, it's not only white, quote-unquote, children who are race conscious. Critical race studies in the United States have found that all children are race conscious, or able to identify people by race, and all children have incorporated in their minds the existing racial hierarchy, which is to say that it's not just white children who are aware that there's a hierarchy that places whites above blacks, but also black children are aware that there's a hierarchy that places whites above blacks. So it's not only white children who incorporate and who internalize these hierarchies, but black children as well. Now, I want to stress this is entirely consistent with the theory, the original theories of critical theory, which were developed to suggest that working class people would incorporate the hierarchies in society and accept their place in existing society. So far, we're entirely consistent with the theoretical edifice that was built in Europe and then replicated empirically in the United States. Can we go to the next slide? All right. All Americans are aware of broad racial generalizations. So, for example, everyone's aware that African Americans commit more crimes than non-African Americans. White children are aware of that, black children are aware of that, white adults are aware of that, black adults are aware of that. Now, it's important to realize that in the United States context, it's not only a white person who will avoid driving through a black neighborhood out of fear of crime. A black person will also avoid driving through a black neighborhood out of fear of crime. This racialization of the American cultural hierarchy is something that all races are aware of. Similarly, everyone in America racializes Barack Obama as America's first African-American president. Of course, Barack Obama is 50% Irish-American. Why do we see him as African-American instead of as Irish-American? Well, because Americans are attuned to pick up these racial hierarchies. Okay. Thank you. Can you go back one second? Yeah. So these kinds of hierarchies are often described as a form of structural racism. And that's where critical race theory departs from what can meaningfully be understood as critical theory in social science, in that it's not racism, that is, it's not conscious denigration of another race to recognize these hierarchies. They're racial structures. Racial structures are not necessarily racist structures. Okay, next slide, and I'll prompt for the slides, thanks. Okay. This term, structural racism, has now transcended its roots in meaningful social science to become a policy term. Okay. We talk about the legacies of slavery as part of structural racism, the fact that most African Americans are descended from slaves, thus have less accumulated family wealth, thus have less accumulated family cultural capital, or less educated, and these legacies of slavery continue. It's a structural fact of America, but it's not necessarily racist, which is to say that if someone moves to the United States from Nigeria, that person doesn't, by moving to the United States, become someone who is a victim of the legacies of slavery. That person may be part of the racialization in America of blacks, but that person doesn't suffer disadvantage. And again, here we can see Barack Obama as a prime example. Barack Obama is the child of an African PhD student and a white American mother. Barack Obama, of course, has none of the handicaps resulting from the legacy of slavery. Yet, the American system racializes him as black and views his accomplishments as the accomplishments of an African American, when in fact his accomplishments have nothing to do with overcoming the legacies of slavery. Similarly, selective admissions at universities are based on this idea that people of different races, particularly African Americans, have suffered a legacy of racism, yet they're not based on any actually existing demonstrable racism. In fact, African Americans in the US face significant positive discrimination in education throughout their educational careers in the United States. However, they generally come from a lower class background, a lower economic background, a lower educational background. So there's not racism in the active sense. Instead, there's a structuring according to race, which the critical race theorists have used to obfuscate the matter. That is, they've taken a structural patterning according to race, and they've called that racism. Okay, next slide, please. Okay. Now, when we move abroad, trying to apply this to other countries, including to Bharat, is not a direct application. We could imagine a critical theory for Bharat. So you could imagine a critical caste theory that is developed to account for structural inequalities in Indian society. But just as with the United States, the fact that there are structural inequalities does not mean that there is active casteism. Okay. We could even make the same account not only for caste, but for linguistic differences. For example, South Indians, so people who speak Malayalam, people who speak Tamil, are on average wealthier and better educated than people whose native language is Hindi. So would we say that there is a structural anti-Hindiism in Indian society? Oh, of course we wouldn't. But the structural patterns are still there, that people who speak South Indian languages as their native languages are structurally, on average, better off than people who speak North Indian languages. Okay. The key point here is that structured societies that are structured by topics like race or linguistic issues or caste, is not necessarily the result of current discrimination. And thus the claim that ending discrimination will end these structures is empirically false. Next slide, please. Okay. As a result, affirmative action policies, which exist in the US and in India, generally only benefit the most advantaged of people in the structural category being selected. Because the problem is not actual racism, because the problem is not actual casteism, the affirmative action policies don't fight racism or casteism. Instead, the affirmative action policies merely pluck people up who are the most advantaged of the disadvantaged and give them additional benefits. Next slide. Okay. So overall, critical race theory in the United States is at best inspired by critical theory. It's not really a direct application of critical theory. The problem is that critical theory has become political in its application instead of being treated as an academic topic. As an academic endeavor, it's perfectly respectable, but its political application has been really wildly inaccurate. Okay, I think, final slide. With apologies for going over 1 minute, very often we see in India that especially Bharatiya graduate students are applying US principles and US theories to an Indian or a Bharatiya environment where it's not directly applicable. Slide, please. Yeah. And the fact is that caste is not a race. So we can't take US racial hierarchies and assume that the same kinds of hierarchies apply in India as a caste hierarchy. Slide. This applies especially to the claims about Afro-Dalits. There is no evidence that, in fact, Dalits form a former slave category in India, that they're descended from African slaves, or indeed that there's any racial attribute of Dalit status. Instead, these are US categories that have been inappropriately applied to India. I think that's it. Ironically, critical theory would tell us that the policy interventions that are currently being proposed, which is to say affirmative action, would not themselves fight racism or casteism, even if racism and casteism exist. And ultimately, that's the great irony of critical theory, is that if we really accept the premises of critical theory, then we would find that affirmative action to favor people of low caste or lower race would not actually solve the problems that critical theory finds, which is the problem of structure in society. Okay. And I believe that's it. Thank you very much. I think the best way forward is the RSS way. The best way forward is simple social interaction. If you want to eliminate casteism, dine with people of other castes, socialize with people of other castes. Indian religious and lay organizations for the past 100 years have been working to eliminate caste distinction in society, and I think they seem to be doing a very good job of it. Keep up the good work. Apologies for running over. Thank you, everybody.
What is expected from you? Crispy questions only, not comment on the themes or the lecture given by our panelist. Mike, please.
Namaste, I'm Nina from Chicago, and my question is for Professor Elst. Professor, in your Marxism soft power slide, you said BJP is not consciously opposing the new form of soft power of Marxism. Why do you think so? And what suggestions do you have for BJP as a political party to oppose it? And for me as an individual to oppose this soft power?
They can nominate people in important posts in universities. And I don't even want to suggest that they should do anything corrupt. I mean, I know that if you put up enough rupees, you can buy a teaching post in a university. But that's not at all what I mean. You should just use the powers that you have to bring the right people in the right place. And so they themselves keep playing this game, like BHU. I know that's a university I know quite well. You see the last but one vice chancellor was a JNU product. He immediately used his power to nominate a maximum of leftists, and the atmosphere in BHU, which used to be very traditionalist, has palpably changed for the worse. So this can be done in the opposite direction, only I don't see it happening. You know, I mean, the left in India and their dupes in the West are, you know, painting this picture of, you know, saffronization of education and so on. There is nothing to it. Like I know the situation in the Indian Council of Historical Research, you see, which for the last 10 years, you know, has seen a few good people. Mostly, you know, it's a you know, a parking place, you know, to put RSS gerontocrats who are not historians, or if they are, you know, don't do much with it, don't have the dynamism to be a factor of change. So they completely waste their chance. I read on the left side, for example, that about the Aryan invasion question, you know, the out of India theory totally systematically being identified with RSS BJP. Now, I know from practice, I've been in the middle of this debate for 30 years. I know that there is absolutely nothing on their side. Like, for instance, in a recent speech, Narendra Modi himself spoke about Adivasis. You see, that's a term strongly pushed by Rahul Gandhi, very explicitly. But so very many mindless Hindus use that term not knowing any better, whereas that's a critical expression of the Aryan invasion worldview. that the tribals are the original inhabitants and all the rest are invaders. I mean, you see, the intellectual struggle is going on, but it's not waged by the present government. And so fortunately, largely thanks to the new technology and to the atmosphere of liberalization, there is much private initiative. You know, there are plenty of new, online media and YouTube channels and so on, where the message is being spread. But so this is not done by the government. Perhaps in the long run, that's a good thing. You see, you can't truthfully say, oh, this is just a BJP operation. It's not.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hello,
This side.
I'm Rabindra Jain from Myanmar. My question to Mr. Vikram, what is the solution so our future generation can read the true and Hindus or Sanatan history? Thank you.
Thank you. I don't think the solution can be very simply put. But I would always reiterate that there is absolutely no alternative to scholarship. There has to be knowledge production, and that is imperative. And I would again like to bring that sense of alarm and urgency among the crowd here. Because we can go on till the cows come home, say, let's remove Romila Thapar and Irfan Habib and all these people from the syllabus. But if you remove or dislodge, say, her authoritative and very definitive book on ancient Indian history, what is the alternative? Where has our side ever invested in writing another alternative perspective to ancient India or medieval India from a different perspective? So therefore, in the universities across Bharat, or more perversely, the UPSC examinations and so on, the same R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, Romila Thapar, and all these people will continue to be read because there is no other alternative. So the only alternative I would reiterate is an urgent investment. If the government, as Dr. Elst is not, currently looking at that as one of its priorities, I think it should come through private initiative, through corporate initiative, through private individuals. And I'd like to take this occasion to just bring to the attention of everyone here a very, very small baby step that at least I have taken in this regard. Just last month, I announced the foundation of a new institution called the Foundation for Indian Historical and Cultural Research. Thank you. Now, the main idea that this foundation seeks to do is to do exactly what I said, produce more and more knowledge and scholarship. And how do we do that? Because most of these historians, who claim themselves to be experts of ancient India don't know a single word of Sanskrit. They don't know a single word of Prakrit, Pali, Sen Tamil, and all the other classical languages, and still they can be an expert on that area. A medieval Indian historian can be an expert without knowing Arabic, Persian, and all the languages in which the chronicles of that time was written. Now, today, me as a modern historian, if I have to learn these languages, it will take me a couple of lifetimes. So the idea is, why not have multidisciplinary, focused research groups, which brings together a modern historian, a Sanskrit Pandit, a Pali or Prakrit, scholar, a geologist, an archaeologist. All these people, geneticists maybe, for what Dr. Elst was talking about, the Aryan invasion, we need to look at epigenetics and endogamy and all of these different fields. These have never spoken to each other. They've all operated in silos, and historians have not interacted with them. Sanskrit Pandits are only concentrating on the linguistic aspect or the Karma Kand and so on, and not looking at Sanskrit knowledge for historical research. So to create these small focus groups which can then be incubated in universities across Bharat and maybe outside India through some of the people who are there, and address several of these burning issues, whether it's Aryan invasion, apparently the caste system, how did it evolve, when did it become rigid, what is the role of the cow in our psyche, what has been the Hindu genocide over the centuries. I think all of these need to be documented. Several thousands of books need to be written. Academic immediately peer-reviewed papers have to come, and we have to storm the bastion. And unless we do that, we can keep talking here, we can keep criticizing Marxists, we can do all of that, but it won't lead to any change, mind you, on the ground, because the children in Bharat will continue to be reading those same books for their entrance examinations.
Last question. One last question only.
This question is to Vikram. And first of all, thank you very much for this very enchanting, lovely discussion. And as we are, I like to think we are in a family. So Vikram, although said a lot of important things, but he wasn't blunt enough. Please allow me to be blunt enough. Vikram, a couple of points. I think it was mentioned from the panel that perhaps one of the best prime ministers we've had is Narasimha Rao. He was responsible for two of the most anti-Hindu draconian measures ever taken in independent India. The first one was the establishment of the Waqf Act that continues to encroach and usurp Hindu lands and temples with alarming regularity. And the second one was the Places of Worship Act that continues to deny Hindus their rightful seeking of justice to reclaim their own temples. So I think I might be encroaching into my panel when I talk about false narratives, but this is one of the false narratives that is being propagated. No one has been more anti-Hindu and has taken back. The other question that I want to ask is, another panelist said that the best way is the RSS way. Vikram, I want to be blunt here and ask you point blank, when you talk about sounding an alarm, and you talk about the situation is so dire, alarm is sounded for maybe a minute, an hour, or a day. Can the alarm be sounded for 10 years? So if this is the way where it takes 10 years for you to sound an alarm, and is it that you hit the change or the change hits you? I'm afraid the RSS, although is a wonderful organization, and absolutely my compliments to it, but it waits for the change to hit it rather than it hits the change. What do you have to say to that?
Not listen.
I would agree with you that I think, being in power also means you need to exercise that power. And as I think Professor Elst also said, you need to show that you are in power. There, I think there is a huge slip between the cup and the lip. And I think part of that is also, Anand, I would like to take the blame on all of us as civil society too, because we have not made it amply clear to the power structures in the country that, reform of our education, particularly our historical discourse, is of paramount importance to all of us. And till that is done, till the alarm is sounded as a collective, if given our population demographic, if crores of people actually sign petitions and send it to the government of India saying this is something that we would want to be done urgently, this is something that connects so deeply to our ethos, to our identity, and what our children are going to and grandchildren are going to be studying growing up, and you need to do it, I think no government or no organization can afford to ignore it. We are also callous about it. And the government, I think, represents the worst among all of us. And so that is why they also have other priorities, economy, military, all the other things take precedence. In the education scheme too, correcting the historical narrative, therefore, becomes the last of the priorities. I think through this Congress, if lots of people have an online petition and send it to the Honorable Prime Minister saying within the next 6 months, we want our history textbooks for our children and grandchildren changed, and that is a demand on which we will vote you back or not in 2024, dare you any party or RSS or anyone will dare to ignore that?
India, Hindus are 15% of the world's population. We are 3% of world GDP. Can this group of people commit 100 crore rupees in the next 2 years to fund historical research? Koenraad Elst has been writing, nobody funds him. Salvatore has been writing, nobody funds him. Vikram has been writing, nobody funds him. Can we form a group of 10 people here? Please put up your names. We'll join together with Swami Vigyananda to collect 100 crores from 2,000 people over the next 2 years to fund historical research, the books that they are all write, to change the narrative. Please stand up and volunteer and give your name to the professor and to Swami Vigyananda. Otherwise, all this is no use.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I was supposed to conclude the session as a chair, but through questions, some of our panelists worked as a chair and one question as a chair. So I'm concluding this session with lots of thanks to my wonderful panelists. Thank you very much. We'll assemble again for another session at 2:30 p.m. Thank you so much.